Joining us now, staff writer at The Atlantic, Adam Serwer, Atlantic staff writer and MSNBC political analyst Ashley Parker, MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin, and NBC News entertainment correspondent Chloe Melas. All right, Lisa, first, I want to get the legalities straight here because these are private companies. They are allowed to fire somebody for what they say. That's fine. The difference here is the FCC getting involved, and the term is jawboning. If they continue to jawbone the local stations that have these licenses, what sort of legal boundaries might they cross, and who might be in a position to sue for harm?
That's a really interesting question, because certainly there could be a legal dispute between Jimmy Kimmel, for example, and his employer, depending on the nature of the terms of his contract, as you and I were discussing yesterday. There's also a legal term called tortious interference with contract. And basically it means a third party is inducing you to break your contract with another person, right? Usually those kinds of claims aren't brought against the government. In fact, it's very difficult to bring a tort claim against the government at all. But that essentially is the legal claim that would fit the conduct that you're describing. The FCC is tortiously interfering, allegedly, with Jimmy Kimmel's contract with his employer, or with the contract between the folks that own affiliates and the network itself as the distributor of content.
So it would be Jimmy Kimmel bringing the lawsuit.
It could be Jimmy Kimmel bringing the lawsuit. I mean, these affiliates who are owned by folks who have merger interests here don't seem to be that upset by what the FCC is doing. But, for example, if you had a situation where an owner of affiliates was upset at the network itself from yanking the content, that could give rise to a legal claim. Again, depending on the nature of the contractual arrangements between the network and independent owners of affiliates that air its programming.
What did you make, Adam, of the blowback? I mean, there's two strains of it. There is the comedians that have gone on the air and basically mocked Donald Trump, as we saw with The Daily Show. And then there are folks that are either outwardly on the right, like Ben Shapiro, or folks that were part of Donald Trump's winning coalition. I mean, we call them the bro podcasters, for lack of a better word, who are saying this doesn't feel right. This is not what Republicans have been about. It's certainly not what Donald Trump campaigned on.
Well, I would dispute that. I think it was very clear from the beginning that when they were referring to free speech, they meant their speech and not other people's speech. But I do think that the proper response is what the comedians have been doing, which is defiance. Do not obey. When the essence of free speech is being able to speak on public affairs, and particularly to be able to be critical of those in power, whether they're people in government or allies of people in government. So I think the proper response is for people not to be intimidated. Now, I think there's a partial issue here, which is that you have a structural issue here, which is that you have all these companies that own all these affiliates. And if you intimidate the company, then all of a sudden you have this domino effect of, financial coercion, where you can use the corporate power to sense what people say indirectly through the government. And I think that doesn't make a huge amount of difference in terms of whether that's a free speech issue. I mean, if you look at, there was a Supreme Court ruling last year that was 9-0 that said government officials cannot use their authority to coerce private actors into speaking a certain way. So I think really this is a open and shut case of censorship.
But it's again about who's going to bring the lawsuit to get it to the Supreme Court.
I think that is an issue structurally. But like I said, I think the proper response to the emperor telling you you're not allowed to make fun of him is to continue to laugh.
But if these broadcasters take them off the air, where are they going to do that? Because there are obviously there's Substack and there's Twitter and there's Instagram and there's TikTok, but a lot of these places are being bought up by Trump-friendly billionaires, and a question could be raised of whether the algorithm gets changed and those voices don't get amplified any longer.
Well, and it's not just the ones that are getting bought up by Trump-friendly owners. It's also, look, if you're the New York Times and Trump sues you for $15 billion, you have the backing of the New York Times, right? At The Atlantic, we have the backing of The Atlantic and feel comfortable writing, what is fair, accurate, and true. But we have that. There's plenty of smaller papers and publications that, again, may not even be owned by a wealthy Trump billionaire, but they look and they say, look, there's just 10 of us. We don't have the ability to fight a massive lawsuit, even if we're right, even if we'd win. And it has this quite deliberate chilling effect of when they're choosing, how do we cover something? What do we do? They may decide just not to touch that.
So I wonder if the reaction that is important here is to watch the reaction from Donald Trump's own party. Let's play Ben Shapiro. I mentioned it a moment ago.
The FCC should not be threatening action against ABC or its affiliates or Disney based on Jimmy Kimmel being a jackass. He's been a jackass his entire career. Social censure is perfectly appropriate. The blowback from the public, totally natural and, in fact, good, because Jimmy Kimmel is, in fact, a schmuck who should have been taken off the air 10 years ago. I do not want the FCC in the business of telling local affiliates that their licenses will be removed if they broadcast material that the FCC deems to be informationally false. Why? Because one day the shoe will be on the other foot.
How important is Ben Shapiro's voice here? Because Ben Shapiro's not always been on Donald Trump's side.
Yeah, you're seeing some sort of true conservatives make that point that for years they have historically fought for hate speech that is protected under the First Amendment. They have fought against cancel culture. I will say, however, as you and I have discussed many times, Katie, Donald Trump is not really an absolutist on many issues, on immigration, on tariffs, but he's otherwise quite flexible. Donald Trump is not a free speech absolutist. He's not a First Amendment absolutist. He is, as Adam says, he doesn't want things to be said that he doesn't like. He's fine with certain parts of speech. So I don't know that a Ben Shapiro or a Matt Walsh is necessarily going to change the president's point of view.
Why is he so sensitive to it? I mean, is it Donald Trump that he's obviously very sensitive to it? And the question of why is probably a psychological one that we might not be able to perfectly diagnose here. None of us are medical psychologists or psychiatrists, and we're certainly not treating him. But I guess the apparatus around him, Adam, is what I'm more curious about. How. You know, he had a 4-year period where he was not in power. Project 2025 was thought through. He staffed his administration with all sorts of folks who study the government and the levers that they could pull. How important is it to have those people around him right now who understand that the FCC can be a very, very powerful tool? Is that why it's more effective this time than it was in 2016?
I think it's more effective this time because the people who you would expect to stand up to Donald Trump aren't doing that. We have, for the past few months, the most shocking thing is the degree to which American elites in corporate America, in academia and politics have laid down for Donald Trump. And then you have, people who have been stuck in ICE cells for, being pro-Palestinian activists who are coming out and saying, this is what I believe. So I think the real issue here is, a complete lack of civic virtue and courage on the part of people who we have, selected to be our leadership. I think that's the real problem.
Consolidation of power, certainly. Chloe, there's also a reaction that's coming from the entertainment world. You've been tracking that. Explain what you're seeing.
Katie, there was a lot of support last night on late night shows, but I would say the most vocal and not surprising came from Stephen Colbert. Take a listen.
After threats from Trump's FCC chair, ABC yanked Kimmel off the air indefinitely. That is blatant censorship. And it always starts small. Remember like in week 1 of his presidency, Gulf of America. Call it Gulf of America. Sure, seems harmless, but with an autocrat, you cannot give an inch. And if ABC thinks that this is going to satisfy the regime, they are woefully naive. And clearly, they've never read the children's book, If You Give a Mouse a Kimmel.
This morning, I woke up to 100 text messages from my dad saying, I'm sorry they canceled your show. I go, that's not me. That's Jimmy Kimmel. But to be honest with you all, I don't know what's going on. And no one does. But I do know Jimmy Kimmel. And he's a decent, funny, and loving guy, and I hope he comes back. That's all.
And may I just say, it is a privilege and an honor to call Jimmy Kimmel my friend in the same way that it's a privilege and honor to do this show every night. I wake up every day, I count my blessings that I live in a country that at least purports to value freedom of speech.
Here's the thing that I want to point out, Katie, and I think it's just significant. Jimmy Kimmel, if given the opportunity by Bob Iger over at Disney and ABC to come back on the air, the question is, though, does he want to? Because Sinclair, that owns several of these ABC affiliate stations, has already said that there is a hard line for them as to whether or not they would air him again in those markets. They want him to issue an apology and also make a contribution financially to Charlie Kirk's organization, right? And are those things that Jimmy Kimmel is going to want to do right now, because he is in this cultural history-making moment when it comes to broadcasting in this country. So is he going to want to stand for what he believes in? Will ABC and Disney allow him to go back on the air? And you know what? Call the FCC's bluff, because as we all know, it's very difficult to revoke a broadcasting license, and really hasn't been done so with a major broadcaster since the 80s. And if they even tried to do it, it could take months, if not longer, for something like that to really happen, Katie.
Is that still true, Lisa? Would it still take months, if not longer?
It's supposed to take months. I mean, like many things that happen in government, there is a process that is dictated through which you take away somebody's right or expectation of property, right? In the same way that when we talk about, for example, the revocation of federal funding from a university, there's a process that's supposed to take place when you threaten to revoke a broadcaster's license or even discipline a broadcaster for obscenity or indecency. There is a process that's supposed to take place. So I'm not as well versed on the FCC process as perhaps Chloe is or I could be, but I trust that it is a process that would likely take months.